Okay. Hello and welcome to this webinar supported by the Rita Allen Foundation on designing a journalism collaborative. It's going to be led by the wonderful Heather Bryant, who's a founder and director of Project Facet, is one of the smartest people I know and one of the best voices in journalism if you're looking to think about what's happening in the industry, what's next, and how to deal with it. I'm going to kick it over to Heather shortly, but for those of you who are interested in learning more about this webinar series, you can go to centerforcooperativemedia.org/programs and see a full event calendar. You can also look up the Center for Cooperative Media on Eventbrite. We have a variety of sessions, or a handful of sessions at different times for our remaining webinars. We have 3 in total, and you can check out all the details of how to register there. I'll go ahead and with that, kick it over to Heather, and you can take it from here.
Well, thank you very much for that very, very kind introduction. So I'm really excited that you are all joining us today to talk about this. This is really about the ins and outs of designing your journalism collaboratives. So I'm a really big advocate for collaborative journalism because it is such a powerful tool for us as we try to make sure that we're doing, not only our best journalism, but also as much journalism as we can when there's such a high need for, deep, thoughtful, powerful reporting. And it's a rare newsroom that has all of the resources necessary to tackle the complexity and the sheer quantity of reporting that's needed today. But in order to gain from all of these advantages to collaboratives and a collaborative approach, that also means that we have to contend with the day-to-day reality of collaboration and how you decide when to collaborate, how a project functions, how it can be managed, ensuring that we keep in mind the need to assess the quality and effectiveness of our collaborations. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So the framework for this webinar is similar to the collaborative journalism workbook, if you've seen that, in that it's a series of questions that you can consider and work your way through, both internally to your organization or yourself if you're working independently, and then the considerations that you can work out with your partners. Since collaborations manifest in a lot of different ways, everything from multiple newsrooms that contribute their own story to a larger package focused on a theme or place, to large newsrooms that act as a hub to connect local newsrooms, to breaking down a complex process and doing a deep investigation. The process and the product can look different for everyone. So we're going to focus on what you can be doing to design a process that makes progress towards your goals, and trying to avoid the things that can derail you, in as much as that we can try to avoid those things given how unpredictable our work can be. So let me move this forward here. All right. So with all that being said, I like this mental framing for collaboration, because collaboration as a process is more likely to be successful and accountable to the needs of all the partners when it's viewed as a flexible arrangement that can adapt and evolve. There has to be a desire to actually work together, and the right people need to be in place to keep things moving forward, even when it feels like the news cycle is on fire and we're all just running around trying to keep up with it. So it's not about committing to work with a partner forever. It's really recommended that you start with smaller projects and you build up your relationships and capacity and muscle memory for working together, so you don't have to create these permanent collaboratives that last forever. It's okay if you're working on short-term projects or temporary projects, and that's actually a great way to get started. And I think what's helpful is, collaborations can evolve, whether it's because of circumstances outside of your project or by having a nimble process within the project. If you end up doing something entirely different than what you set out to do, that's not automatically a bad thing. The most successful collaborations are ones that can change up and respond to different factors that are going on so that they can continue to function and be the most successful. And it's highly unlikely you're going to find partners that have the exact same level of resources, capacity, expertise, or reach as you do. And that's part of what makes collaboration powerful. It's about bringing together a lot of different assets and different kinds of expertise to the table and building something that no one partner would have been able to do by themselves. So as we get into this, that's, there's a lot of work that goes into creating these types of outcomes, and that's what today is about, is like, what is the what are the logistics and what are all of the considerations to make so that you can actually reap this type of benefit. And just a second, my screen's acting funky. There we go. That works now. Sorry. So in order for these things to happen, you have to have some degree of intentionality in how your collaborative will work. Now, some of these do happen just by virtue of working with others, and some of them you have to really plan on in order to make it happen. And that's the goal today, is to give you an idea of what things can you be accounting for as you move forward with collaborating. And this is really about the conceptualizing and the implementation part of collaboration. So to that end, the next few sections where we get into those considerations I mentioned earlier, I've broken this up into 4 pieces, which is to consider, design, manage, and then assess, to kind of help us loosely group these stages of the process together. And then as we get to the end of this, we'll have plenty of time to talk about, are any of these questions that kind of stick out to you or any sections that you want to dig into. So keep in mind, if you have questions, we'll be able to talk about them today. So collaboration is, as much as I advocate for it and I talk about it endlessly and maybe obsessively as being a really powerful tool, it's not always going to be the right fit for everything that you want to do. And part of doing this work and doing it successfully is considering whether or not a project is a good fit and thinking about what your goals and likely outcomes would be if you were to do something collaboratively. So most collaborations start with a topic in mind. Some start with partners, often partners that someone has worked with before, but having something in mind to take to potential partners and being able to say, this project, this subject is important for these ideas, and this is something that I think we can work together on. That makes the path a little bit simpler in narrowing down specifically what gets done. For a given project, consider carefully what you think you want to accomplish. Sometimes it's audience expansion, sometimes it's just about making some necessary reporting happen, and so on. And it's okay to have multiple goals, but it is really good to take some time and be thoughtful about what those goals are and whether collaboration will help and how likely you are to accomplish those things if you take a collaborative approach. So what is it about collaborating and working with partners that will help you achieve those goals? Is it, expertise that you don't have? Is it resources? Is it access? And what is it about the partnerships that's going to make this possible for you? This will help a little bit if you don't have partners already in mind, or if you're trying to figure out what's the unique contribution that's going to come from each partner. And then as you start to consider the actual work it takes to make collaboration happen, it's really necessary to think about, is everyone who is involved truly on board, and does everyone who needs to know actually know? Not only is it very awkward to approach a leader from a partner newsroom at an event or something and mention the collaboration and have them not know what you're talking about, it's also part of making sure that you have the resources and the capacity to actually do the collaboration. And this next question is a big one, and one that I find frequently gets skipped by newsrooms. Do you, your team, and your organization have the capacity and the willingness to be a good partner? Most of the time, these conversations tend to start with organizations evaluating the quality of their potential partners, and they skip over the step of really interrogating, are they ready to be good partners themselves? Because everybody thinks that they are the greatest of all time, and you are the greatest at a lot of things. But you also have to recognize that it takes work and it takes a positive relationship with your partners to be good at this, and you have to be ready to do that work. In sessions where, I've been talking about collaboration with people and we talk about working with partners, I've actually run into people who say, well, I can't collaborate because there's no one else in this city who's as good as we are. And that's probably really just an indicator that they're not ready for collaboration. There is something to contribute that most any newsroom will have. Everybody has some special, unique value about them or some unique expertise that they can add to a partnership, and this is really about figuring out what that is. If we want to really get those benefits from collaboration, then we need to recognize the unique value of each partner's contribution, even when it looks different from our own. And to this point, being a good partner is an act of trust and openness. And if you go in intending to keep score about who's doing how much, or intending to let those with the most resources control or dictate to the other partners, that's not really collaboration. So you and your organization need to be ready to be good partners, to be equitable, to be respectful, and not extractive. And to that last point, it's happened where newsrooms will see collaboration as an opportunity to, engage with an audience segment that's not represented in their organization. And then they think that, partnering with a newsroom that does serve that organization is a quick way to gain credibility. And I would note that this is a time to reflect on the intentions and whether or not the effective outcome is extraction or just using another newsroom for the audience they've worked hard to gain. And we can always use some more deliberate attention to this dynamic in news coverage. For example, I've facilitated discussions at conferences where we've had both large urban newsrooms and smaller newsrooms operated by Indigenous people, and the obviousness with which the larger newsrooms and mainly white newsrooms were only partnering when they wanted to gain access to the Indigenous audiences. The smaller newsrooms had been serving those audiences, and it did not go unnoticed that they were being basically used for their audience and not truly partnered with. So it's something to really think about. What is it that you're trying to gain out of partnering, and are you doing so in a way that is fair and inclusive of your partners and creating value for them as well? So with your partners, it's helpful to understand the values that underlie their operations, and this helps you understand their motivations, and this will be helpful for you when you're deciding, what are the goals for us to work together, and potentially how you navigate disagreements. If you understand what your partner was trying to accomplish and what goals and values kind of focus and frame their work, then you can understand how they're approaching the decisions that they're making. This can help you when you're trying to navigate areas where there might be friction. Each partner should benefit in some way from participating. I mean, the idea is that not that just you're an organization and you go find a bunch of other organizations to participate in a story that you really want to do because it's really useful for your audience. You're able to use the contributions they make and then put the story out for your audience, but then if they don't really get something out of it, that's more of an extraction than a collaboration. So it's helpful to sort of think about, so how does a partner benefit from this project, and at what point do they have the opportunity to advocate for how their audience will benefit? And this makes discussing which potential outcomes are important a useful step. But after you discuss that, you do need to assess what's possible or likely with the collaboration so that you can arrive at a feasible project with achievable goals, alongside a few aspirational ones that you hope are possible. And then, like we talked about before, every partner is going to be different. They're going to have different capacities. They're going to have different availability. It's good to evaluate whether the project works when, maybe a partner can only offer the time of one person at certain times, or there's some sort of seasonality to the way that their newsroom functions, or that their participation may be interrupted by something that's local to them. So can a partner realistically participate in the collaboration, and can their circumstances work with how your collaboration needs to work? And then ultimately, what kind of collaboration matches, with most of these details? Are you looking at a short-term project where each partner creates their component independently? Is it a long-running complex arrangement that's deeply involved? Figuring out which configuration you're going to use, that will at least help you figure out how in depth you need to go with designing and planning how things will work, which is kind of the next stage of all of this. And what this design stage is about is really about creating the circumstances for effectively and efficiently working with your partners. And this is a phase that can take more time, but you should scale the complexity of it to match the complexity of your actual project. If you're doing something that's a really simple one-off kind of co-produced article, you might not need to answer all of these questions. Answer what makes sense for the complexity of your projects or your collaborative relationship. In many cases, answering these questions are going to help you answer other questions, because as you figure out what's the leadership structure of a project, or what's the unique contribution of a specific partner. Well, that helps you figure out, you know, are you budgeting for people? Are you budgeting for tools? Are you budgeting for these other kinds of things? So some of these questions in many cases will help you answer other questions that are going to be a part of the process. So what is the scope and the timeline of your project? Do you know how many stories you would like to produce? Is there an idea of like how many videos or what kind of packages you have in mind? And then is this project based off of a funding cycle? Is it based off of an event? Do you have a clear endpoint at some point in the project? Kind of figuring out the scope and the timeline is the best way for partners to figure out what their capacity for contributing to the project will truly be, because it's not an open-ended question, and this helps everybody prepare to be as effective as they can be as they participate in the project. Figuring out if there's a set end for the project, or at least a deadline for evaluating whether or not to continue, is actually kind of a sometimes forgotten question. A lot of projects will go because they're covering an event, and they'll go until that event concludes. Some projects will go until money runs out, and then everybody is unsure what's happening at that point. I've had conversations with some newsrooms who've done projects together, and they published, you know, that initial batch of stories they intended to do, and then nobody really knew if they were still partners. They didn't know if they were done, and after a lot of time had passed, then they were just too embarrassed to ask each other if they were still collaborating on this project. So it can be really helpful if you can say, we're going to work up until this point, we're committing to publishing this number of things, or facilitating, you know, this number of editorial events or products, and then we'll evaluate, you know, do we have the interest of all the partners or enough partners to continue? Do we have the resources? Kind of having in mind, what does it look like to close down a project or continue a project can be a really important part of it, especially when your project includes contributions from your audience. If you have a deeply audience engaged product, it's kind of confusing to them to build it up and spend months investing your time and getting your audience to invest their time, and then you disappear because the grant has run out and you haven't made a plan for either warning them or giving them some sense of that you're going to facilitate that because it's part of a collaborative project and it's going to run until this point in time, or being able to give that group some ability to either hand off to someone else to run it, or that they have an expectation around disbanding at that point. So it's really good to have that in mind, not only for the partners, but also for audiences that you might potentially involve. This part about thinking about the strengths and capacity and the needs of each partner kind of goes to that notion that everybody's going to be a little bit different, and it's helpful to evaluate each of these pieces as a way of figuring out who is contributing what and when they'll be able to contribute it. So perhaps you have a newsroom that's actually just a 1 or 2 person newsroom. Maybe they're a radio station. So their strengths might be in producing extremely high quality audio type projects, but because they're a 1 or 2 person station, that means that the availability of their time is very limited. You know, so what is their strengths, what are their capacity, and then what do they need in order for you to be able to work with them effectively? Every organization has some sort of immutable truth about the way that they function. For a lot of newsrooms, at some point in time, either during the day or during the week or during the month, a machine is going to be turned on and something has to come out of the other end, whether that's a print product or audio or video. And those deadlines shape their capacity for participation, and it's good to have an understanding of what that looks like for them so that that can be taken into consideration. And then what will each of them end up actually contributing to the collaboration? It's kind of interesting. Sometimes this is a detail that can fall apart just because everybody's like, all right, well, we're going to do stories. Let's go do our stories. And then people come back and they're like, well, am I doing a whole story by myself? Am I doing images? And what am I doing exactly? And when do you expect to see that from me? So it's helpful to just have a very clearly defined set of what are the contributions for each partner. And then in terms of expectations that apply to every partner organization, These are the things like everybody is expected to participate in whatever form of communication we're using. So maybe you have a Slack group or a Google group or something like that, that's the form of communication everybody's using. So everybody's expected to be on that. Everybody's expecting to abide by a certain set of rules around publishing or linking or acknowledgement. Everybody's agreeing to abide by holding things until an agreed time where everybody is publishing. So there's a set of expectations that's going to apply to everybody, and it's helpful to clearly delineate what those are. And then what are the unique expectations for each individual partner? So these are the things that speak specifically to what their contribution is going to be. So if you're creating a print product that's on behalf of the partnership, you know, that's the unique expectation for you. Or if you're the partner who is using your legal team to do the review of all of the work, then that's a unique expectation for that individual partner. And having this accessible to everybody means that everybody understands what's coming from where and who to ask for these different things, or who to be looking for in terms of who's going to be communicating on a particular topic. Having clarity around just who's doing what and when they're doing it, that eliminates a significant amount of the friction and confusion that can happen when you're trying to mesh different groups of people who have different ways of working and get them able to be on the same page and understanding exactly what's happening at any given time. And then we think about onboarding, but also it's really important to think about offboarding. So for partners who decide at some point they can't or don't want to continue, how do you create the space for that to happen? And if necessary, do you need to have an evaluation for whether or not a project is still viable if a specific partner leaves? So if you're doing, you know, a massive data investigation and the bulk of that sort of data cleaning and analysis is being done by one partner, what does that mean for your project as a whole? It can be helpful to evaluate which partners, after you know who's contributing what, which partners are partners that this project can't happen without, and either having a plan for, if they leave, how do you replace that capacity? Or if they can leave and it doesn't, you know, change your project, then what does it look like to have a positive off-ramp for them to leave the project in a way that maintains the relationships you would want to have for potential future collaborations? And then we get down into the details, which is, you know, do you have a lead editor? Do you have a team of editors? Is this a project manager? What does the leadership structure actually look like for your project? There can be a lot of confusion when you're trying to mesh multiple organizations together, and then the people who are doing the work end up realizing, you know, I don't actually know who signs off on this thing that I've created. I don't know who reviews this. I don't know who gets to say this is ready for publishing or that this is compatible with what we're doing. If you have like a fund of money for reporting expenses and someone wants to do a project that requires them traveling and they want to request money to do that, there needs to be a clear structure in place so that people know who they go to get their questions answered. So figuring out, you know, do you have a lead editor? Is it a team of people? Do you have a project manager? That can be really important. And most collaborations that are successful, they say in large part that's because they have a person, a manager or director for the collaboration that is making these details available, making this process move forward, and being the person who can answer these types of questions. And figuring out, you know, is this person going to be from any of the partners, or will a hire be made? And those collaborations often say that having it be an external hire or a third party is very helpful, because it avoids, in part, it avoids that impression that someone's going to be having a favorite, you know, that their original newsroom is going to be given preference of some sort. And then think about, what is the level of formality? If you have these goals, you have an idea of who's doing what, you have an idea of what leadership you might have. Do you need to have that in a written agreement? Do you need to have like a memorandum of understanding? Is there a financial agreement if there's like a grant coming in or people are contributing money to a fund? Do you need a formal contract? Figure out what makes the most sense for the relationship you have, for the project you're doing, and for the needs of your organizations. Most projects do have some form of at least saying, these are putting in writing, these are the expectations, this is what everybody's committing to doing, this is what we're saying is going to happen. And at least having that kind of document to refer to can be helpful. I mean, I've seen every level of sophistication in that, from handshakes to bar napkins to multi-page contracts, but you can figure out what makes the most sense for you and your organization. And where it becomes most common to have these types of financial agreements is when you do have specific fiscal investments, either for like a foundation has given you money for doing something, or you've gained money in some way, or you have partners who are contributing financially to a project beyond their staff time. Then it can become really helpful to clearly establish budgets and responsibility for those different items, and who's going to be doing the reporting, which is like the next part of this. Who has to do report backs to foundations, who has to do that kind of communication, and who's going to be responsible for making sure that all of the partners are fully briefed and aware of the level of detail that they need to be aware of for such things. Documentation, it comes for us all in the end, so figuring out who's responsible for that is really important. So what you want to hope to accomplish with doing this is just making sure that you have a good handle on the shape of the whole thing, the scope of it, what you're trying to accomplish, understanding why people are there and what they want to get out of it, figuring out what are those unique things that the partners are going to contribute that makes this collaboration effective and useful and able to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. And being able to collectively agree on the timelines that take into account the capacity of your partners and take into account the needs of the project, figuring out your leadership structure, and then making sure you have the right kind of benchmarks and tracking that's going to help you follow along and evaluate the success of the collaboration as it's happening, and also make adjustments if you need to make adjustments. And then figuring out, do you need additional support if it's a formal collaboration with or contractual one, or whether, just shared clarity on the scope and details are all that's needed. So the managing phase is really about getting into what does this look like for someone to make things happen on a daily basis. Now that you know what you're there for, what everybody's supposed to be doing, who's supposed to be helping them do it, what does it look like on a daily basis for them to actually do the work of their collaboration. So you have to keep things moving. One of the biggest indicators or pieces of infrastructure that's necessary for a successful collaboration is communication. So figuring out how is everybody who needs to be in contact able to do so. Like, how are you going to communicate? What platform are you going to use for it? What are the expectations for the frequency and level of participating in that? So is everybody expected to look or check for an email every day? Is everybody supposed to go and check like a running list of notes in a Google Doc? Is it a Slack channel? How can everybody make sure that they understand what's going on or be able to reach out without asking them to be checking everything every day? It's really helpful if you can identify, this is the way we're going to communicate. So if something's happening that you need to know about, this is the channel you should look for in order to find that. So it's either going to be an email from our manager or it's going to be in the Slack channel, but this is the place you go to know what's going on or to ask people. And then what's the workflow for the project and what tools have to be used for that? My suggestion is always never make the tool chain that you're using more complicated than the project that you're trying to do. So if your project really is, we need to write stories, we need people to be able to communicate with each other quickly and easily. This isn't a long ongoing project. Sometimes really all you need is email, a Word doc or Google Doc, and a spreadsheet. Or sometimes you need way more than that if you're doing something that's really long and involved. So figure out, how complex is the thing you're trying to do, and then how many tools are you going to need to actually do that. And most projects just need something to manage communication, their content, and making sure that they're on schedule in terms of the deliverables and the tasks. So those are like the big needs. So what is the workflow for moving through that? Do people understand who is going to be signing off? You know, which leader, which editor, which manager do they need to contact when they're finishing it? Make that as clear and as documented as you can. People, especially if they're newer to collaborating, tend to kind of withdraw and go silent if they don't know what's going on. And so if you can do what you can to make sure that everybody has access to this information, you're more likely to maintain their engagement with the project. So what shared resources do you need? And when I say shared resources, this is kind of the idea of our collaboration. Maybe it has a specific logo for the project, or we have a tagline that describes what this project is, or we have a way that we describe everything and have a little tagline that goes, or we have a specific way of identifying our partners. What are any of those graphic assets or language that needs to be created and then need to be accessible to all the partners and everybody understand this is what we use in terms of social media, or this goes on every story, this goes in the video, this is something that should always be said in the audio. Figuring out what kind of shared resources need to exist and make it accessible to everybody. This one can be kind of tricky. So accounting for turnover or a partner departing the project can sometimes be a thing that slows the work down or maybe sometimes ends it, especially if the turnover takes away your most enthusiastic cheerleader for the project. If the person who's keeping things moving forward is the person who leaves, having a plan in place for who picks that up and who's able to keep things going will kind of keep your project from sort of just petering out and disappearing. And then like we were talking about earlier, with a partner departing the project, can the project still move forward and be successful? Do you need to find a new partner to take that place? What does it look like for that contribution to go away? Kind of having that in mind is helpful, just because there's nothing predictable about this industry, and it's a safe bet that something is going to change at some point during your project. So having an idea in mind of, okay, this is what we'll probably do, if this kind of thing happens, that just kind of helps. It helps from being blindsided, and it helps from things falling apart if you already have an idea of, what a backup plan might be in those circumstances. Documentation. Write down everything that you can write down. Write down your workflow. Write down all of the tools that you're going to be using. Write down who the leadership is. Write down the process. If the story is done, this is the person it gets sent to. This is when it gets published or where it gets published. Here's all the shared resources. If you do this work as you're going, then it makes it a lot easier for the people who are involved to change if they do change, which is kind of to the point of that's how you onboard either new people or new partners. Having all of that created also keeps you from having to repeat that for everybody, and that'll make your life a lot simpler. And it will also help when you evaluate the project after, either at your benchmarks or when the project is concluded, because you'll have all of that already in place, and you'll be able to say, that platform works for us, this process didn't work for us, we would do this differently. If you already have that together, you're not trying to remember that at the end. And then also kind of think about, news is going to be happening with your organizations the entire time you're doing your collaboration. So if your collaboration is the whole thing that you're doing, like maybe you only do a few collaborations or one collaboration at a time, so breaking news doesn't disrupt you, that's great. It's likely though that your partners are going to have a daily or weekly or monthly, whatever their schedules are, kind of news cycle that they still have to pay attention to. And it's helpful to evaluate, is this project significant in a way that means no matter what's happening in the world, everybody's still working on this no matter what? Or if the partner newsroom is located in a coastal state and that state has a major hurricane or something, are they going to have to break away? Or if a fire happens or something else, how will you account for people might have to step away or step back if the news cycle interrupts them in some way. Or maybe your project is so significant and important that interruptions aren't a concern, which is also good to know. This is the not fun part to talk about, but it is good to know, like, if someone decides to break an embargo or do something that they said they weren't going to do, what if somebody jumps the gun and publishes early, you know, by accident or maybe intention, or if someone just disappears from the project, kind of having an idea of, do you need to have a process for addressing that issue? Is there any sort of agreement breaking that means, okay, you're out of the project now? Like, kind of have, you don't have to list out every single possible offense, but it is good to kind of have a general sense of, we're all agreeing to do these things. If you can't, you know, abide by embargoes, then, you know, you might not be invited to continue to participate in this project. So plan for the things that you know could happen. So unpredictability is the theme for every day in journalism. So that's a hard thing to say, but also, and then plan for, but plan for unpredictability is a good idea. So if you consider how to manage these likely scenarios, someone leaving, turnover in the newsroom, the fact that breaking news is going to be happening, each one of those possible events become less disruptive and less likely to cause the need to do a major regrouping or an alteration that can, you know, can either change your scope, it can change your goals, and in scarier instances, it might mean that you run out of resources because you don't get to the finish point that you needed to get to before, you know, grant or funding or whatever resources you had are ending. So kind of keeping that in mind, you're like, okay, this is what this work looks like from day to day, and these are the things that could change those operations. Let's have in mind that if that's possible, you know, what's our plan for if that happens? So assessing what we do, we're getting better at this as an industry. Journalism is getting better at assessing what it does, but we, you know, used to be very, very bad at doing this. For collaboration, it's getting a lot better because there's so many people who want to figure out how well it's working as a practice. But when you either reach a benchmark in the project or the project has concluded, taking a look at, you know, did actually working with partners, did this help us achieve the impact that, you know, we set out to make? Were we able to do this? The goals that you had both for your organization, for the reporting with your partners, were those actually met? And then importantly, would you work with those partners again? A lot of projects are starting to involve newsrooms that have worked together before. And importantly, if you think about whether those partners will be working, you know, willing to work with you again, I've run into more than one collaboration manager, quite a few actually, who said that when they were figuring out partners to invite to a project that they were putting together, they've looked for which newsrooms have partnered together. And your reputation as a partner can precede you. It's a small world, and getting smaller every day. And, you know, going back to, are you willing to be a good partner? Keep in mind that being a good partner means that people are going to want to work with you again. So if you want to be included in future projects, being honest and assessing, you know, would your partners want to work with you again, will be valuable for you if you want to be included in the future. And think about, to that end, can you collect feedback from the team? Is there, you know, any sort of survey that you can design at some point with your partners that kind of says, you know, did this workflow make sense to you? Did these tools make sense to you? What kind of feedback could you be collecting from the team, either throughout the collaboration or maybe at the end, so that you have some data points that you can use to learn from? And then really account for, like, are there surprises? Were you able to do something you weren't expecting? Were you able to find something that you did not previously know was going to come up? What were the surprises, both good and bad, both in the work of collaboration, like doing journalism together, and then also with the reporting and the journalism that you were able to do? And what would you change if you were going to do another project, or, you know, you can even think about, if we did this same project over again, how would it look? And to the benefit of everybody else, what of that can you share with the rest of us so that we can also learn from it? So I think we still have some time. There's like 15 minutes left or so. that we can talk about any questions you have. You can throw them in the chat. I'm able to see the chat. For some reason, all my little boxes where I could see people's faces went away, but I can see your chat if you want to put any questions there.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and unmute everyone temporarily. Feel free to remute yourself if you have nothing to add, but if you do, now is the time. I can ask a question that I had if you want me to kick us off, if nobody has anything.
Go for it.
I'm wondering if you can go into if you have any more details or examples of maybe a successful sort of like conflict resolution setup, or you talked about you mentioned briefly like what does it look like? Does that mean somebody's out of the collaboration, or have you in your research come across any effective strategies aside from sort of like having an MOU up front? Like, can you talk about some of the ways to mitigate that or to prepare for that sort of conflict in the event that it happens? I mean, I'm sort of all over the place, but you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I think one example that it might get close to addressing that is that I've seen projects that are long running where everybody has to affirm on a regular basis that they want to keep going, and that they can say this, what's not working for them. And if they were going to continue, that has to change. So there's a process, like I think that kind of feedback process goes into it. And I think that's the opportunity to also say, this isn't the right collaboration for me if people aren't sticking to, publishing timelines, or if people aren't able to adequately correct. And that's the opportunity to address that as a problem within the group. I think for like more serious things, like say everybody agreed to not publish something until a certain date and time, and then one partner put everything on their website, like a day early or something, then I think that's when you lean on those relationships, and that's why it matters to develop, working relationships with the people that you want to partner with, because it's much easier to have those conversations then and figure out, okay, are we going to say this, how do we address that? And I think it varies for every project to figure out what's appropriate for them. But I think the relationships is part of it. I think having that continual feedback process is really important and a big part of it. And I think that's one of the resources that we can continue to work on, is like, what does it look like to have an example version of, you committed to this and you didn't do it. So, maybe reporting funds are not available to you now, or, we're not going to provide you with the next set of stories or something like that. I think it can vary, but I do think having partners regularly affirm, yes, this works for me and I will continue to work, or no, this isn't and here's why, I think that can be a good way to handle those discussions.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? I see Rodrigo is unmuted, but I know earlier. Oh, here we go. He typed it in here. Heather, a journalism project involving only 2 partners, can that be considered collaborative?
Yeah, I think the definition that we've been using is 2 or more partners to do a project. So I think so.
Yeah, those kind of partnerships, I'll just say, those kind of partnerships end up being super agile in many cases. And there are definitely benefits to a fewer number of partners. But then, of course, there's a point of diminishing returns when the value of partnering, if it's only 2 people or 2 organizations, it can be useful to have more. And again, it can be more agile when it's 2.
Yeah, and I think one of the another thing that might mark them as being one or the other is I do see a lot of newsrooms where it's just 2 partners and basically they're just reposting each other's stories. They're not working on the reporting together. I think sometimes that's kind of like right on the line of, is this collaborative or is this just republishing each other? And I really think towards the side of it being collaborative, they're working together to make reporting and supporting each other in some way, beyond just sending everything they've written to someone else or created or produced to just be republished on another site.
So we got 10 minutes left before the hour. Again, you can type your questions in the chat if you prefer to do it that way. We will give a couple of moments here to make sure everybody can type that in. And not everybody's a speed typer. Also, feel free again to unmute yourself and chime in here as we wait, we wrap up this session with Heather?
I have a slide of some resources. So I'm going to put that up in the meantime as well. So definitely go to the collaborativejournalism.org website. There's a lot of stuff there, a lot of research that's been publishing. Joe has done an amazing job at collecting, everything that we see come across the internet about different projects. There's a collaborative Slack that we've been working on building up so that you have a place to talk about collaboration with other people who are doing the work. And then both Project Facet, the workbook, and betternews.org also has a great section on collaborative journalism. And then if you can make it to Charlotte, North Carolina in May, the Collaborative Journalism Summit would be the perfect place for you if you really, really like this topic and want to learn more about it and hear from a ton of people on the cool things that they're doing. And I'll leave that up there for a little while if people want to copy any of the URL down.
And I'll make sure to put these links. We'll make sure to put these links in the follow-up email to all the attendees, and I'll try to make sure I put them in the YouTube description when we upload the video to YouTube. It doesn't look like we have any more questions at the moment, so I will leave that to the comment section when we publish this. Heather, is it okay, or can they contact you, and how can they do that if necessary?
They can absolutely contact me. So my email is heather@projectfacet.org, or you can reach me on Twitter. And sometimes I joke, if you just say collaboration 3 times in a mirror, I randomly appear wherever you are. But I'm always excited to talk about this, and please feel free to make use of my email if you want to talk about this more or have questions or want to follow up in any way.
Okay, thank you so much, Heather. I really appreciate it. We will have another session of this in March. The links to the other 2 series in this webinar series, which is supported by the Rita Allen Foundation, can be found in the chat as well as on our Eventbrite page. Or if you're confused about that, you can always go to collaborativejournalism.org or centerforcooperativemedia.org, and you can check out the site there with all the information and everything you need to know. Thank you to all of you who joined us. Again, thank you to Heather for a very informative session. And hopefully everybody has a great week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.